This episode of the Beer Bound Podcast is brought to you by Rolling Hops Beer Tours.
Hey everybody, Garrett here from Rolling Hops, as always joined with my partner,
Andy.
We're here to tell you guys about our virtual craft beer tour offering. With what's going on in the world, unfortunately, we haven't been able to run our historical craft walking beer tour, so we've pivoted to taking the virtual experience of craft beer directly to you guys. Wonderful for team building events, corporate events, even just a night out or in, for that matter, with your friends and family. And we're doing this online.
Have any questions about the beer tours or want us to tailor make an event for you? Just shoot us an email or send us a message on any form of social media. Rolling Hops, you can find us everywhere.
RollingHopsBeerTours.com is where you can get a hold of us, and we'll see you guys soon.
Cheers.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Beer Bound Podcast. We are very excited to be joined by Kyle Mulligan, owner of Sleeping Giant Brewing. Sleeping Giant is located in Thunder Bay, Ontario. The brewery, founded in 2012, turns 10 years old this year. Very exciting. However, one can find the brewery in its newest location, the current site for Sleeping Giant, which dates back to 2016. Within a year, a unique taproom experience developed that looks over the brewery's many stainless tanks and an inclusive storefront to showcase merchandise and some local collaborations. So we look forward to learning about Sleeping Giant and the growing beer scene in Northwestern Ontario. So without further ado, we welcome Kyle to the Beer Bound Podcast. Hello, Kyle.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Great, thanks. Welcome.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, you were just telling us it's a little bit cold in beautiful Thunder Bay. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always cold in Thunder Bay, I think, except in the summer. But we had a little bit of a cold break for the past week, I guess. A little bit extra windy and extra snowy.
Nice. Well, it is Canada after all. Maybe, Kyle, can you start us off just a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about Thunder Bay, where you're from? Is that where you're from? Tell us about your connection to beer. Give us as much as you can.
Sure. So actually, I was born in Geraldton, Ontario, which is a little bit north of Lake Superior. Way back, we lived there for a couple of years, and then we moved to Nikina, and then we moved to Thunder Bay. So essentially, I grew up in Thunder Bay. Went to school, and then Lakehead University here in Thunder Bay, and then University of Toronto, and then moved back to Thunder Bay. When my kids were young, I guess I needed a hobby that involved lots of cleaning and making messes. So I started making beer, making homebrew, probably 8 or 9 years before we opened Sleeping Giant. And back then I would make, used actually Sam Caligione's brewing book, the homebrewer started Dogfish Head, and made beers that I had never even tried before. I think first or second beer we made was a IPA, which you couldn't really get IPAs locally. And back then, Canada was Alexander Keith's IPA, not hazy IPAs in West Coast. What have you now. So yeah, I didn't even taste it. And then when we tried it, it wasn't very good, like most homebrews are. But as things progressed, I started making all grain batches and sourcing hops when I go to the States, and started making better beer. And that's how I got hooked on the beer making part. And commercial brewing is excellent because I get to make lots of beer all at once, but I don't have to drink it all, which is great. Unlike home brewing, often you're stuck. Oh, I want to make another beer, but we're left with so much beer before we can move on to the next batch. From that point, we kind of decided there was actually a craft beer in Thunder Bay for 1 year called Great White North Brewery, and it made one beer called Port Arthur Pale Ale, which is before Thunder Bay amalgamated. It was Port Arthur and Fort William. So they really ostracized half the city by making a beer called Port Arthur Pale Ale. But it was around for 1 year. I knew the guy who started the brewery. He was a home brewer and an engineer. And after a year, he was like, well, it's either get bigger or go back to engineering. So he went back to engineering at that point. And my wife and I and a couple of friends, Berlinkwitz, decided, hey, we should think about opening a brewery because we really wanted to bring craft beer to Thunder Bay. We wanted to bring the craft beer experience. We wanted to have more beers on tap than just Guinness and Keith's and a bunch of light lagers. So at that point, we kind of came up with a plan and found a spot in 2011. We did it all ourselves essentially and opened up in 2012. And Sleeping Giant Brewing Co. was born. We're happy where we're at today, but it's a lot of work back then. And that's how we got to brewing. Brought it to Thunder Bay.
Yeah, it's a beautiful inception tale. So 2012, you were in your original location, and then 4 years later, you're now in your new home. That's right?
Yep. Yeah. So in 2012, we actually brew house behind me, but it's the same brew house we sourced back then out of specific mechanical in Victoria, BC. At that point, I just had 2 fermenters and a bright tank, both 17 hex. And kind of the plan was I'd be brewing, and so that was once a week brew, turn it over, and then we added another 17 hec fermenter. And then we hired somebody who had finished their first year at Niagara. It was actually the first year, the inaugural year for Niagara, and he's from Thunder Bay. Taught him how to brew on the system, and then we slowly kept expanding at the old site until we had 3 17 hec fermenters and 3 30s. And then we needed more space. We were actually at that point, we had a canner, we got a cast canner from Calgary, same one we're using now, which is semi-automatic. And what would happen is we had a lot more people at that point, but we would manually pull the cans off the pallets, climb up the ladder, grab them, sanitize them, and get the groove going where you'd push them into the canner. But when we were brewing, we'd have to move everything and take everything down so we could get the grains out from the brew house. So that's when we needed space. We were moving everything around twice a day. So we found this spot and kind of turned it over in about four months. Kept brewing at the old site while we were refreshing the new site, and expanded at that point as well too. So we added 470 hec fermenters and another bright at that point.
Cool. Was that like when you upgraded a lot of that, was that more so just for the capacity at the time? Or were you guys thinking a little bit further ahead?
Thinking further ahead. So space wise, we're always struggling for space, but we were thinking ahead in terms of the brewing capacity. Since then, we've added 2 more fermenters, 130 and another 60 or another 70, as well as another bright tank, just because of the turnover in packaging and carbonation and that. But we're not quite maxed out with capacity. It's more just to speed things along. And this year we're hoping to max out our capacity. We also have added a separator in this building. But yeah, we're running out of space more for storage of, say, empty cans and grain. So last year we, last January, we got a silo. So our silo fills actually come from Canada Malting, which is actually a mile down the road on our waterfront. So it's our local maltster who was doing totes for us before and got the silo, and now they were able to do trucks, and they actually cruise on down the road and try and time it so they can go to Surrey in Minneapolis at the same time after they finish with us. So yeah, that freed up a lot of space, and it's actually nice because with the totes, what we would do is take a pail and you'd weigh out 15 kilograms and do that over and over again until you got to what your grain bill was, somewhere between 250 and 400. And
Wow.
now we just push a button and let machines do the work other than the bags.
Sounds much easier for sure.
Yeah, it brings its own other problems, but way easier. And my nose is less dusty doing the silo than before.
Well, that's good. So with this, it's interesting because I don't think we don't know too many craft breweries actually use a silo for their grain. So does that mean, like my understanding is, obviously craft beer changes. You guys have a number of different styles that you brew, but for the most part, are you using, I guess, this one base grain and then adding other ones in? Tell us how that works.
Yeah, so that is our base Superior Pale Ale malt. So it's a 2-row malt. And then we try so it's in our most popular beer, which is Northern Lager, which is very malt forward, light golden ale. But it uses mostly that malt as well as a bit of Munich and a bit of wheat. And we'll design beers. Some beers we use Pilsen, but we use bag malt for that. But most beers we'll design around the 2-row pale.
Right. Oh, hey, it sounds like it makes it operations pretty efficient. So that's good.
Yep.
Good stuff.
Kyle, for us foolish Southern Ontarians, can you tell us a little bit more about maybe the craft beer scene in Thunder Bay? Maybe just a bit about the city itself. Like, I know you mentioned I guess you are technically the second craft brewery of Thunder Bay, although it sounds like you're kind of the first.
Yeah,
definitely.
We're kind of the first because, well, there's actually been other ones. There's been Renegade way back in the 80s.
Okay.
And they did they'd make actually pretty interesting brews and they'd put them into PET bottles. So we actually have an old PET bottle full of Renegade in our office. That's got a lot of negative pressure in it and will never be opened. But they made interesting brews, but it was a little bit far of a reach back then, a little bit avant-garde. So they folded up in the 80s. There used to be northern breweries that would make local kind of macro beers. And that was an offshoot of Doran's, which was around a long time ago. And then there was no local beer for quite a while, and then Great White North, and then they closed, and then we opened a couple of years later. So we were the first craft beer that stuck around. Since then, our friends at Dawson Trail opened up a couple of years later, and there's a smaller brewery. They started as home brewers as well. And then One Time Brewing has opened up in the past year. And then just recently, Lakehead Brewing Co., which is more of kind of a brew pub feel to it because they're downtown Port Arthur. They opened up, and actually the brewer there was a brewer here. We moved from our old site to our new site. So it's come up a little bit. There still is a lot of beers that come from Eastern and Southern Ontario, especially with the beer pubs that we frequent, like Sovereign and Red Lion. So it's not a huge scene, just because we're really isolated too. So our next nearest brewery would be in Kenora, which is about 6 hours away drive. And then the other way is about 7.5 hours to the Sioux. And then if you take the northern route, then Sudbury, North Bay. Yeah. So it's a long way to go. And really, there wasn't much of a craft scene when we opened up, and we really had to kind of bring some education with us. There was a small crowd that really supported us, and then that crowd became bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's been great, but it was really small at the beginning. We're pretty isolated. We're on the Lakehead, so the top of Lake Superior, top west of Lake Superior. We're about a half an hour drive from the border into Minnesota, and we're about 110,000 population, but there isn't a lot of small towns around us.
Right.
So not a huge population. We're pretty isolated.
Pretty sizable population though, really, when you do consider
Yep.
kind of how isolated Thunder Bay is. Like that's pretty sizable.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're the big small city.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I know.
Good way to put it.
Yeah, I have family in. I'm gonna sound like an idiot here because you obviously know this, but I have family in the western portion of Canada, and there's always tales thrown around that the longest drive is just in Ontario. Like, it just takes 2 days to get out of the damn province.
Yep, pretty much. My daughter goes to University of Maine, which is in the middle of Maine in Orono, which is the capital's Bangor. And it's a 12-hour day drive to get there. So if we're driving, we drive to North Bay and then we drive the rest of the way. So it's crazy.
It's far. It's very far. But I loved it. Garrett and I, we do quite a bit of beer traveling as much as we can in our exploration to find all the wonderful variety of craft beer all across the province. We'd love to make it to Thunder Bay, but it is really far. One day we will.
One day
we'll get there.
Yeah, on our long cross country adventure. But okay, so you said, can you give us a number, Kyle, on how many craft breweries exist in Thunder Bay as of 2022?
Yep, 4.
Okay.
There is 4.
Firm on 4. That's good. Okay,
Yeah,
so you're
round number.
Yeah. So you guys are like, I mean, even in the whole, like with all the breweries that we know and we work with in Southern Ontario, I mean, 2012, that's pretty old for a craft brewery.
Yep. We don't often think about that, but yeah, it's our 10th anniversary this year, and we're getting up there. Especially with all the new breweries, like if we go down for OCB or just for travels, visiting family, it's you realize you go back to Toronto after 2 years not being there, and all of a sudden there's 5 more breweries kicking around. So you try and hit them all.
Yeah, it's hard to
our
keep
life
track.
struggle trying to hit them all.
It's like a perpetual Pokemon game. Well, Kyle, yeah, I mean, in terms of your 10 years of existence, do you think, I mean, obviously you've had 3 more breweries establish themselves in Thunder Bay. Do you see the city itself as sort of becoming far more craft beer oriented? Is it, I mean, just in that short decade, I'm sure I can just imagine how the consumer trends have changed. Garrett and I know how it's changed in Southern Ontario, so we suspect it's pretty comparable to Thunder Bay. Is it becoming, like, would you tout the city as being a pretty beer savvy town in terms of consumer knowledge?
I think so. I mean, it's still, you still get people all the time where, oh, I didn't realize you guys were here. People who live here. It's like, oh, I've never tried your beer before. Okay, that's cool. But yeah, it's become a lot more savvy in terms of it's a smaller group, but it's a noticeably vocal minority who kind of is looking for sours, looking for hazies, and we try and since the beginning. Like our first beer was a pale ale, and we still make it. But it was to kind of straddle the border. It was trying to get people to start tasting different types of beer rather than just flavored beer. So it was a little bit more hoppy, but not too hoppy to turn people off. A little bit sweet with caramel notes, so that people will kind of get used to that. And then we also made a wheat ale and then a stout, which we still make too. And we still like to kind of mix it up, but we still also like to make the beers that everyone likes to drink. This summer we made a blonde ale called Quittin Time. Put it into short cans, which is a big deal for us because it's a big hassle to get the canner turned over. People still want that. They still want that light, easy drinking summer brew. But right now we're doing something called Craft Cares, and what I'm drinking is it's our rosé. So it's got raspberry and hibiscus. And, the base is a bit more hazy. We use our Vermont yeast that we use in our hazy and our brut IPAs. So we kind of try and straddle things a little bit because being the biggest brewery in Thunder Bay, you get everybody wanting everything. Year-round people will come in and they want our Armory, which is our spring seasonal, which is a Scottish 90 shilling, but they want it. So they want it all the time because it's flavorful, but it's not hoppy, and they're sick of only being able to get IPAs all the time. So it's a lot more savvy, but it's not, you don't just get the people who want IPAs or sours or the next flavor bomb. So you have to temper that, and you have to make sure you're not alienating your original customers at the same time.
Of course, strategic decision in a sense, but you also want to brew things that, I guess that you enjoy. Actually, maybe further to Andy's question, about, your local customer base and their take on craft beer and knowledge. When you mentioned earlier that, sort of coming to Thunder Bay, you also had to bring some education with you. Maybe you could talk to a couple points on how you did that and maybe how that's resonated over your tenure as a brewery.
Yeah, so our first couple of years, actually, I think it was before we even opened, we were just hoping we would get our license. We got Mirella Amata to come up. And so it just happened that she came up to educate some of our licensees and then do a beer and cheese talk the day we got our license. So it worked out. It was
perfect
June 14th. Then we had her back the next year. She did a bit more education. And then I think the year after that, she did a beer pairing at a local restaurant called Bite, or it could have been a couple of years later. So we've had Mirella Amato back a couple of times. We love her. She's great. And she's very friendly and very inclusive in how she educates. We also, within the brewery, anybody who wants to get their Cicerone beer server will pay for it. And then we'll help them on their way to getting their Cicerone. We had thought about the Prude Home, but it's because they want to come up. It's more difficult, so we need an online kind of teaching. I got my Cicerone beer server a long time ago, and I think maybe the first year we opened. So my name was on the American site because there was no Canadian site back then. And then since then, I'm waiting until the pandemic's done because I've done my written part of the Cicerone, but haven't done the physical tasting and pouring.
Kyle, why Sleeping Giant?
So Sleeping Giant is a very amazing thing to Thunder Bay. So you have to come up here and see it. But Sleeping Giant is a rock formation peninsula that's out across our harbor. So if you look at our logo, I don't have a logo on me. It's got the Sleeping Giant Peninsula on it. And you can see it from lots of places within Thunder Bay. Some people say that, well, it doesn't look like a giant, but I think everyone's on board in the past 2 decades that it looks like a giant. Back when CBC did the Natural Wonders of Canada, we won first place, I think by popular vote, but we didn't get recognized because it's not, it wasn't political. Well, it was a little bit political, but Sleeping Giant itself it's a very mystical place. The indigenous population, it's got some mystic to it in that Nana Bijou, there's a silver mine out on the peninsula, Silver Islet. Nana Bijou was protecting the silver mine, and she fell asleep while protecting it, and that's the giant that's in the water.
Cool.
Nana Bijou is her actual name, not Sleeping Giant.
Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a amazing provincial park on the peninsula with lots of hiking, campground, a lake. It's beautiful.
It does sound extremely beautiful. I've seen pictures of Thunder Bay, and it's all classic Canadiana beauty just all around you. Great Lakes, you have lake beauty, the rural forest beauty. It's just, and of course the beauty of Canadian winters. Yeah, it's fantastic. Very
some tiny mountains around us too.
Immense beauty that we don't have in Southern Ontario.
There's lots of beauty in Southern Ontario. You have the escarpment.
Yeah, that's true.
Pretty much it.
Got some tall buildings, Yeah, well, that's really interesting. In terms of, maybe you could tell us a little bit, Kyle, about the past couple years. I know we're all unbelievably exhausted and nobody wants to talk about this, but I'll put you on the spot a little bit. How has Sleeping Giant been faring in the past couple years, just with constant lockdowns and reopenings and different curveballs thrown at you at every direction? How have you managed?
Because the initial lockdown was pretty aggressive. We were kind of pretty aggressive in keeping things afloat and keeping things going. Though everyone drank a lot of beer for the first couple of months, so that worked out well for us. We did deliveries locally. We'd never done deliveries before, but then we introduced same-day deliveries within city limits. So then we would deliver. Obviously, there's curbside service too. That really helped, but it was a surprise because that's not the busy time of year for a brewery. So our beer just kept dwindling while we tried to keep up. And then since then, it's kind of been up and down. So last year, that same rush for beer did not happen. Everyone kind of took a break in January, February, March. So I think those were the worst months we've ever had since moving here. But we just kind of pivot all the time and do different things and try and keep things going. The year before, actually, also too, because when it was difficult to get sanitizer, our city of Thunder Bay kept asking us if we could do something to help out, but we don't distill, so we would have to source everything. But we finally ended up sourcing everything, making sanitizer, and then actually canning it, selling it to the city and other places. Actually, our first big sale was to Orange Ambulance locally, so they bought a pallet right away. Because their paramedics, flight paramedics, and transporters did not have any sanitizer. So they bought a bunch off us right away. So it just kept pivoting. We still pivot. We're pivoting currently.
Yeah,
but this year we have planned that expect lockdowns, and that's kind of not we're excluding excluding revenue that could disappear. So if it's there, great. If it's not, we weren't relying on it.
Right. It's interesting. And just obviously we've heard of you guys a little before, but before, like any podcast, do a bit of research, and just the fact that, you mentioned pivoting and whatnot. I noticed that you guys have other stuff, like you have, you rent out equipment, which I thought was pretty interesting. Mind you, you might need gatherings to do that, but that along with, I guess, renting event spaces and whatnot, you have other options there. So like the brewing equipment rentals, obviously every brewery needs equipment to run their own operations, etc. But having that rented out, you don't see too often. So like, how did that sort of come to be? Was that part of the plan, something added?
Yeah, that was before the pandemic, when rentals could happen a bit more. Part of it's because that's partly because of the isolation. So how do you get a picnic tap when your beer store doesn't have any picnic taps and they don't have kegs? You used to get beer balls from Doran's or Northern Breweries, which is a big plastic ball that you'd get for a party, and then those would get turned into big eyes for Halloween. But before that, we wanted to get kegs out. People wanted to buy kegs. Not everyone owned a kegerator. So we'd have picnic taps, then progress to, well, how about we sell you one of these taps, which is actually has a gas line, because I hate picnic taps. That way you can have it over a couple of days at a wedding. We do have some kegerators we rent out. We've actually brought in some kegerators for people to buy, which surprisingly we get lots of sales.
Cool.
Because nobody knows where to get a kegerator in town. So they end up buying it from us. And we actually have customers who they get a keg every 2 months. And they might switch it up, or they might just be a Northern Lager drinker and they get a keg of Northern Lager. So that's kind of how we got into that. Currently, there's a whole bunch of Yetis above our separator room that sit there waiting for summer or people to rent them.
Yetis are great.
Yetis are great. They're our sponsor, actually.
Yeah,
not yet.
That
would be cool.
They're not our sponsor yet. They hold the ice for the weekend too. Our general manager Kevin, when he got married, he had his bachelor at a cottage in Minnesota, and we just had a Yeti full of ice and got a keg of beer when we went to the States. So worked out great. We actually, I forgot, we also, because of the pandemic and shutdowns and schools and daycares, and Thunder Bay has had tons of daycares, we actually, our event space, which is 2 doors down on the same street as us, which is a storage space and a barrel house, but has a smaller event space. We were getting that going into the pandemic, and then obviously did not have any events. But a lot of people in our brewery wouldn't be able to work if there was no daycare. So we actually opened a daycare in our barrel house for brewery children. And that has since expanded to not be at the barrel house anymore, but we've rented a place across the street, which has 5 brewery children. And then because of things that just happened, we have a huge daycare that's in the south end of our city. My wife's a kindergarten teacher, and then she has her early child certificate. So she actually opened that this July. So that's another pivot that we did, but that was more to help out our staff and make sure that we could have them here and still make beers so they weren't stressed, which has really worked out. Lots of young babies in our brewery.
Sounds like the best daycare ever. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it is, because somebody does a shift, finishes, has beer, and then picks up their kid across the street and goes home. So they're like, "This is great."
Yeah,
I love it.
Like
One-stop
ideal
shop.
scenario. Brewery children. That's like the best way to describe
Brewery children.
Yeah, they're brewery children, and they become friends together, and
the next generation of brewers.
Yeah.
Brought up in the brew house.
hopefully, fingers crossed. My lead brewer's daughter, when she was last year, so she's a year younger, they have another one now, she would crush grain with the mortar and pestle at the daycare. It's like, well, okay, I'll crush this grain. It's fun.
That's perfect. I feel like my daughter would get a kick out of crushing grain with a mortar and pestle.
Yeah, you should give her some.
Yeah. Especially if it was somebody else teaching her to do it.
There you go. I don't know. Exactly.
Yeah. Not if it's the parents. No thanks.
Yeah. Well, Kyle, can you tell us a bit more about Sleeping Giants beer? Do you have any particular, obviously, from what you've mentioned and from what we've read, you offer quite an assortment of different styles, but do you focus on maybe one or a few? Is there a particular style that's close to your heart? Tell us maybe just a bit more about the actual beer that you brew.
Yeah, so being kind of the original big brewery in Thunder Bay, we haven't focused on, oh, we're the dark lager people, like the Duck one in Atlanta, or we don't just make hazies, or so it's just kind of expanded organically. We still try and make sure that when we make beer, it tastes like beer first, so we're not super hype as a brewery. And we'll get that from like that minority. Ooh, I wish it had more raspberry. I wish it had more fruit. Or I'm like, yeah, but I want it to be a sour beer first, and then like hints of this. We kind of stick to our course. Our core, there's still quite a few IPAs, but it's not all IPAs. So there's West Coast IPA, a hazy IPA, a session IPA, a red IPA, and then the brute IPA. So those are kind of in our year rounds, as well as the stout and the golden ale. But we try and kind of make beer first and follow the trends second. Near and dear to my heart, though, is, I mean, I'm a hop head myself, even though I keep talking about, if I go to a brewery, I'll probably have 5 IPAs myself. My favorite beer depends on how I feel, but overall, it's our session IPA, which is Beaver Duck. We originally made that as a pale ale back at the old place, dry hop pale ale. And then kind of reduced the alcohol, but kept the hopping the same, because you can have 1 or 2 without 2 or 3 without any issues, and get that hop kick and have a great beer. Some days I'll finish brewing and I want a dark lager because it's cold out and I just want something clean finish, but a lot of body. But everyone has their own favorite. I mean, year round, everyone looks forward to our Snow Goose, which is a coffee vanilla porter. Our accounting guy loves IPAs, so he wishes we did more IPAs. Whenever we talk about IPAs,
The numbers say we need more IPA.
But he also says that too. 100%.
Yeah, should probably listen to him.
But I mean, the next beer I want to do is another IPA, but I want to try different hops with the cold hopping, get more files going, and kind of mix things up. So I mean, in-house it shifts, but I mean, lots of us are still hopheads.
I mean, you mentioned
My wife's not.
Yeah, fair enough. There's a beer out there for everyone, obviously.
Yep.
So you mentioned that, a couple of those IPAs. Just out of curiosity, since we've had New Year's very recently with the Brute IPA, I've read articles and it's like, oh, it's like the champagne of beers in a sense, because it gets a little bit more dry. There's like an uptick of that around New Year's? Is that a thing? Like, do people actually pivot to maybe getting that style of beer?
I don't think so. And I mean, there's actually a champagne style of beer. I have a Infinium. I think it's Infinium by Bose. It's in my fridge. And I think it's very dry and finished with champagne yeast in the bottle. I've never opened it because I'm like, oh, who wants to have 4 of these all at once? You just never have that situation. People come over like, well, let's try that Imperial Stout you've been aging for 2 years. Let's have that one instead. So no, our Brute people, the Brute style that we try and make, it's dry, which I like dry IPAs too, but the dry hopping is very fruity. So it's more just people like dry IPAs. Didn't really see a huge uptake around Christmas or New Year's. You get more of the people. We just bottled a barrel-aged Doppelbock that was in bourbon rye, and rum barrels and blended. We bottled that just in December, and you get more people looking for that. So they want a strong boozy thing they can sip around the fire. Yeah, when it's cold out.
Not gonna lie, I was one of those guys. I bought a barrel-aged Imperial Stout for the holidays, and it's nice though. Like, usually they come in the bigger bottle, You can pop it open, share with your family, which is exactly what I did for the most part. But yeah,
Yeah,
totally see
I
that.
mean,
I can relate.
we're not in Times Squares popping bottles.
Exactly.
We're Canadians.
That's right. It was just those hearty, shareable beers like the Imperial Stouts. Yeah. Well, Kyle, has your consumer changed a little bit in the past couple of years? Like, is it? I don't know how big the capacity is of the actual brewery. I know you mentioned you've switched to doing a lot more deliveries, which I think is pretty common in the whole craft beer world. Is most of your sales, are you in the LCBO? Are you in beer stores? Can you tell us a little bit about your distribution and how maybe it's changed a bit?
Yeah, so we're in the LCBO with Whiteout, Whiteout, Northern Lager, Skull Rock Stout, and Mr. Canoehead. Mr. Canoehead is actually, I don't know if guys are familiar with a sketch comedy team from the 80s called the Frantics. Mr. Canoehead is a Canadian superhero. He had a canoe fused to his head when he was coming out of the water, portaging, holding the canoe, and a bolt of lightning hit him. So that's a super cool beer, but it's in the LCBO, and it's a red ale. And then we have a couple of beers in the beer stores, mostly locally. We also do some distribution recently to Calgary. There's actually some expats from Thunder Bay are in Calgary, and they have a pizza place. They really wanted to have our beer there. They also distribute to other places in Calgary because of their models. So there's been actually a big uptick since we've started shipping out there in the past 2 months. So that's a small part of our business because yes, most of it is through our storefront. For when we started, it was mostly people like me, so middle-aged people wanted craft beer. But especially once we moved here and opened the tap room in 2017, so now we have this small group of older people, 60s into 70s, who are here weekly for their beers, and they're great people, and we love them. And then, but we've also had the younger people, the 20s, who just love craft beer and love sours and tends to do sour all the time. So it's kind of all over the map. But I mean, they're the people who don't tell us they love Northern Lager, but buy it every week. So we love them as well.
Yeah.
So it's my wife likes to say our target audience is 19 to 99. So
it's a good target.
I love when we actually see that. So it's everybody comes and everybody's welcome here. It doesn't matter who you are, what age, what color. Everyone's welcome at the tap room.
Very fun. I know. Well, something that I often think about when I think of Thunder Bay is just that you are a university town, and you mentioned, well, younger folks are starting to come to and enjoy craft beer, and I think that is a trend that we see kind of everywhere. Maybe it was a bit more of an older crowd once upon a time, but definitely the university crowd, other than maybe those who want to save a bit of money, maybe like craft beer is starting to flow quite nicely into the university realm. Like, have you seen that? Do you notice that a lot of your customers are university students?
Yep. I mean, it's a smaller group, obviously, because like you said, it's cheaper to get drunk on not beer, and especially not craft beer. But you have a small group that really loves craft beer, and they realize, well, I can have 2 IPAs or I'm going to have 8 beer. So I'm going to have 2 IPAs because it actually ends up being cheaper. And we actually noticed that at the beginning of the pandemic with home deliveries because I was doing them, my wife was doing them. And right around the university where people were still doing their online learning, there was a lot of 20, 21-year-olds who were getting home delivery during that time period. Those people come to the brewery, but I mean, mostly they're going downtown when they have money to enjoy being young.
Are you far from downtown Thunder Bay?
No, well, nothing's far in Thunder Bay. So if you're on one side of the city, the airport's on one side of the city. If you're on one side of the city and you hit all the lights, it's like a 10-minute drive. It's a sprawl, but there's no traffic. We are on the main bus route, kind of in the middle of the city. Not quite middle, but you can't walk to downtown unless you're up for a big walk. Then you can't walk to the other downtown, which is Fort William downtown. So we're kind of in the middle. But downtown, we have a lot of licensees and partners that have us on tap, and actually we're sharing a anniversary with the Foundry. So the Foundry is a good supporter of us and has lots of our beers on tap or in cans. And it's a live music venue, and as well as karaoke and trivia. And so they're a big supporter, as well as Red Lion and Sovereign, which are all in the same block downtown. So we're far away, but we're more of a destination for Thunder Bay.
But not that
It's
far,
not a 2-hour drive.
No,
Yeah.
of course not. Well, Kyle, if things can go back to some, maybe not normal, but maybe back to where we were 2 months ago, let's say, do you have any plans for the summer? Do you guys focus on any events kind of early on? What sort of, in a best case scenario, what do you see in the year-long future for Sleeping Giant?
So best case scenario is we had lots of plans for our 10th year anniversary. Whether those come to fruition at all, but we used to have a party for our anniversary. And that kind of went by the wayside because it comes up close to Canada Day and breweries are always busy in the summer, but we wanted to bring that party back for our customers. We also want to have our own party because we haven't partied in a while. So we want to have a party for us. And then we also want to do a charity event for our 10th year anniversary. So hopefully all those things happen. Typically, we also have a party for Oktoberfest and St. Patrick's Day as well too. So that's kind of coming up this year. There's a local beer festival called Brewha, which hopefully will be in August. So it's run by a local team. And then we also do we also do a craft event, which is making crafts. So people who make crafts at home and sell them. We did one this year in September on our waterfront. It's still pretty cold in September in Thunder Bay, or it can be cold. I think it's around 15 degrees. And so a little beer garden, but mostly it's a huge tent full of craft vendors who are selling their wares. And so we do that in the fall as well too. And it was our first year, but we want to make it bigger and better every year. So go away, pandemic, so we can do that.
Please, for the love of God, go away. Yes.
Someone needs to have a word with this
Yeah.
COVID,
Enough
for a little bit.
Enough. Yeah.
Give us a break.
Yeah, give us a permanent break. Kyle, I think I don't know. I think craft beer is a part of the culture is sort of weekend exploration a little bit. I think particularly in more urban locations, I think individuals like to maybe spend an afternoon on Saturday and Sunday at maybe going to a craft brewery or maybe going to a couple of them. If Garrett and I, let's say, for example, we're in Thunder Bay for a whole Sunday, what would your itinerary, your custom-made itinerary be for us? What should we see if we're really big into the beer scene of Thunder Bay?
You gotta make sure it's a Saturday so that you can hit all the places.
Let's switch it to Saturday then.
Hopefully you can do it all on a Sunday, but yeah, I mean, you would, because we open fairly early, you'd start here and then you'd probably hit Dawson, and then you could do a trek to one time, as well as Lakehead downtown. And then once you're downtown, then you can grab some grub and try some other beers at I think Red Lion, Prospector, Sovereign. Maybe finish up a little bit of a party on a Saturday night at the Foundry with some more beer. It's all actually bikeable, but if you take your time, you can actually walk it, burn off some beer in between.
Could you bike now?
Make sure it's summertime too.
Yeah.
You can. I have
those
lots of
big
friends
snow
who
tires?
who fat tire all winter, and I'm like, it's too cold. But they're, once you get warmed up, it's fine. I'm like, I'm good. Yeah, you could bike now, but I wouldn't recommend.
No.
Wouldn't recommend winter time.
Yeah.
Unless you love cold weather and snow.
So you love not feeling your extremities. Yeah. I actually in Toronto, we don't get that much snow, but I try to cycle as much as I can in the city, and I fell about a month ago. So now I'm kind of off put to maybe I don't want to bike anymore in the cold. It's not worth it.
Did you fall on a streetcar?
No, but I've done that. I've done that before.
Yeah.
That really sucks.
I've done that a couple of times as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the city should warn people about those. It's like, don't bike over those. You're going to fall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I like how in your itinerary, you said start at Sleeping Giant, which is definitely tells us a lot. That's wonderful. I hope, Garrett, you were writing down that itinerary, because we'll definitely adhere to it.
Good thing we're recording.
Yeah, you're right. Don't have to write it down at all. It's a podcast episode. Well, Kyle, I mean, I think that's a pretty nice place to stop. We've had you just under an hour, and we really appreciate your time and don't want to take up too much more. But Sleeping Giant in Thunder Bay, like I said, Garrett and I look forward to visiting soon. We'll definitely let you know before we do so.
For sure.
Kyle Mulligan, thank you so much. And good luck with everything for the rest of the year.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Andy and Garrett. It's been a treat. And my social event during a pandemic. So that's great.
There you go.
That's right.
Checking both things off the list.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Kyle.
Thanks, guys.
Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all our interviews and beer-related content. Remember, craft beer is here.